Hey everyone, welcome back to Keto and Crime. I am back with you with the testimony from Thursday, April 25th in the Chad Daybell case. We're going to hop right into it. My name is Tracy. If you're new here, welcome. I do true crime, dark history, horror movie reviews. I do a holiday tree currently on Cinco de Mayo, complete with tacos. Basically, I try to summarize the daily testimony in Chad Daybell's trials that are going on of cases I've done huge deep dives and have followed. And I've done this one since the beginning. There's tons of playlists and information on my channel. I do try to summarize the daily testimony in these trials down into as tight and compact as I can get, with sifting through 6 to 8 hours worth of live streaming where I take notes and also use East Idaho News as summaries as well. I do have a day job, so I can't just be sitting typing, but I do listen to the live streams every single day. So that's what I try to do for those of you that, can't listen while you're at work or just have a life. I try to summarize those for you. So this is what happened yesterday, Thursday, April 25th. If you're watching this when it first releases, it is Friday, April 26th. So with that being said, let's dive in, shall we? The first part of the morning, that is about the first hour when the stream takes up, is the Judge Boyce ruling on some motions, some that were presented the day before and some that were presented in the first minutes of the day. So one of the first things was prior is disputing or objecting to the state introducing some statements that Tammy made or allegedly made to some of her friends and co-workers. Many of them testified the day before, saying some things that he finds to be hearsay. Among them was a statement that Tammy made to one of her co-workers regarding Chad wanting her to up her life insurance. Another was that Chad called her a zombie, and the third was that she felt better than she's ever felt before physically. Now, the first two, the judge agrees there's no tie-in with the testimony that was given the day prior, so he does allow those to be stricken and not used. However, he does support her being able to say that she felt the best she ever felt in her life, because that was obviously supported by the testimony of her friends that took the exercise and clogging classes with her and just generally observed her every day at work. A lot of the people that testified the day before were both co-workers at the Central Elementary School in Sugar City, and they testified to how bright and bubbly, how she ate healthy, how she was very active and always was beaming and was just a pinnacle of health in their opinion. So he finds that will be allowed because the case law and the case evidence support it, whereas the statement about zombie and that she was asked to up her life insurance was not necessarily supported. So that is, those are the rulings. And then the jury is brought in and prepped on what can be, what is allowed, what is not allowed. And then Fremont County Detective Vince 𝗂𝘂𝘀𝗶 is back on the stand. And Lindsay Blake is continuing the direct examination of the detective. They talk about some of Alex Cox's text message tracking, GPS tracking from the day of the Daybell shooting, how he pinged right around the Daybell property on the day that it happened. They also talk about Cox's search for AR, how to unjam an AR or operate an AR-15 in cold weather, hence harkening back to the fact that it was ruled not to be a paintball gun. And then he said that he also searched for temperatures to show it was 26 degrees the day that Tammy was attempted shot, which shows that 𝗂𝘂𝘀𝗶, I know I pronounce his name, the detective, 𝗂𝘂𝘀𝗶, stated, and don't come for me, it's not intentional, I mispronounced it. He said that he personally Googled the temperature on the date that Tammy Daybell had the shot fired at her, and it was 26 degrees, which ties in with the searches that 𝗟𝗃𝘀𝗃 was looking about how to unjam an AR-15, how to operate an AR-15 in cold weather. He also talked about whether or not a gun will shoot through the shell of a Dodge Dakota, which was the family vehicle that Tammy was driving that day. And then there was records of Cox being under the shooting range under an alias, 𝗂𝗃𝘀𝗃. And he was there 5 times from October 7th to October 15th. And Tammy died on October 19th. And then they show affidavit records from Tammy's phone. Those are entered into evidence. And it shows a email sent from her phone to Mark Daybell on October 13th. It would not be read into the record, and it cannot be read on the live stream. So basically, they just give the gist of it, and the email was referring to the gun incident. Tammy describes the incident to her son, Mark, who was on his mission at the time. She thought the man behind her was either Chad or Garth, turned around to find a man in a ski mask pointing a gun at her. She said she was in shock. She just described seeing what she thought was a paintball cartridge, and she said she wasn't scared until after the man ran away, and she thought about what could have happened. She also told him that she did not go to Zumba the following night. This woman was active. We've already established she was taking a clogging class once a week, a high-intensity cardio class twice a week, and now we find out she's also going to Zumba once a week. So that is 4 hours of exercise classes just there, in with all of her walking that was recorded on her Fitbit. So this woman was in peak physical condition. I bet she could outrun Lori. Wish she had been able to outrun Chad. And then because of her, Tammy referencing a paintball cartridge or a hopper on the gun, they now show a gun, a picture of the rifle that was found inside Cox's apartment that had a large scope on it that could be mistaken for a paintball cartridge or a hopper, which would be one of the reasons Tammy thought it was a paintball gun, even though later we find out from law enforcement it was definitely not a paintball gun. It was the real deal. And then they're talking about the muzzle and how it could have had a homemade suppressor on it. And he says he really believes that is the gun that was used against Tammy Daybell. He said they never found a paintball gun anywhere in Alex's apartment. There was no records of him purchasing paintball guns, though there was plenty of records of him purchasing actual live guns. And then they talk about how the scope could have been misconstrued as a hopper, and how the lateness of the shooting, it was already dark, so it could have easily been mistaken for a paintball gun. And they talk about how Cox's cell phone data pings him around the church, which was about 2 miles from the Daybell residence, or from about 10:05 to 10:45 p.m., with the shooting having occurred at 9:45 p.m. So Alex Cox was in the area, and he had also pinged around the property. And then the phone shut off at about 11 p.m. So he was not in his apartment. He was within 2 miles of the Daybell residence. And then they're talking now about some emails from Charles Vallow to Chad and Tammy Tammy Daybell, most specifically emails where he was telling Tammy about his belief that Lori and Chad were having an affair. And then they talk about how quickly Chad and Lori married within 3 days after Tammy's funeral. And Lindsay Blake tenders the witness, and Pryor will now cross-examine it. And Pryor asks permission to call the detective Officer K, because I guess I'm like Pryor, I can't pronounce his name correctly. And like I said, I'm not trying to be adherent to anyone, unsympathetic to anybody's culture. I just cannot pronounce it correctly. I find that humorous. So anyway, then they talk about talking about some of the emails that the prosecution has already been through. They talk about some of the neighbors, a gentleman named Regan Price, who lives very close to the Daybells, almost adjacent, kitty cornered to them, and that Price had reported a dog snatching earlier the week of the attempted shooting. So they're talking about crime in the area. And now Pryor is asking about location of the attempted shooting in relation to the Daybell home and driveway. He says that and then he asks Pryor asks more about the paintball hopper versus a real scope, and the detective says he understands the difference between a paintball hopper and a scope. I'm a detective. Pryor says that is alluding it would be very difficult to confuse a hopper and a rifle scope, and the detective disagrees and says that anybody that doesn't know the differences in the dark could very easily confuse them. Also, somebody that is pretty good-hearted like Tammy is not going to suspect that anybody's trying to kill her, that it's just a prank. So you also have to take that in consideration. That's me, not the detective saying that. And then they talk about Tammy's Google searches after the shooting, where she was Googling pictures of paintball guns and said she found one that she thought might have been the type that was used that night. And she says, and he's basically just telling the detective does not know what he's saying. And then there's a short break, and then the detective is back on the stand, still with John Pryor, and he says how Tammy describes hearing the whooshing of an empty paintball gun when really it was the jamming of an AR. And he says it's obvious Tammy was more annoyed than scared. And Pryor suggests that because Tammy was at close range, she would have known what was being pointed at her. And the detective says, yes, in the daylight, but it was dark. It's 9:45 at night. Pryor says that the only difference between a regular gun and a paintball gun was the hopper. And he says, again, they found a gun with a scope that could easily have been mistaken for a paintball gun. So basically what Pryor is trying to do here is that this was totally unrelated. This was not 𝗟𝗪𝗁𝗂𝗃, because somebody snatched a dog, and this detective obviously doesn't have a clue about the difference between a regular gun and a paintball gun, that this was obviously an unrelated prank with a paintball gun and teenagers in the area. That's what Pryor is trying to do, and he's being very argumentative about it. He also says that Tammy later on suspected it might be a local bipolar teenage neighbor that was playing a prank on her. He said he was not aware of the bipolar teenager contacting people in the neighborhood or being a nuisance in the neighborhood. He was just somebody that lived in the neighborhood. And Pryor is still hammering on that it was not a real gun. Tammy didn't think it was a real gun, and the detective says she was mistaken. It was a real gun. 𝗟𝗪𝗁𝗂𝗃 was in the neighborhood. But Pryor continued hammering in on that. They play Tammy's 911 call where he pauses it and rewinds it a couple of times on her saying, I could tell it was a paintball thing, but then she also says it was also dark out here and he was holding a gun like it was a rifle. So Pryor keeps playing this over and over, just trying to bribe home the point this is an unrelated prank. And he basically calls them attention. And then he says, can't we agree this 911 call just speaks for itself? And the detective said, yeah, that there was a rifle pointed at her. And he goes, is that what you heard? And he says, yes, there was an undescript type of weapon pointed at her. And then Pryor pulls up a Google picture of a paintball gun, trying to show the differences between it and a real rifle. And again, the detective just backs up what he said and said, in the dark at 9:45, you could easily mistake a real rifle with a scope for a paintball gun with a hopper. So basically, they're pretty much arguing back and forth for the next 5 minutes or so. And then they bring up Tammy, but Daybell's paintball Facebook page, where she describes what happened and tagged a lot of people in her neighborhood. And then prior debates about UTC time versus Mountain time, which is what Idaho was on. And basically the detective just says that it doesn't bear any. The local time was 9:45 when it occurred. And then they start over to talking about 𝗟𝗪𝘀𝗃𝗀's search history and about Cox's arrival in Idaho compared to his gun range visits, and that Cox was at a gun range in St. Anthony's on October 7th, which is pretty near there. He also, Pryor also brings up that Alex visited tons of other gun ranges around the state and other states. And Pryor said it is alleged that Cox fired a gun at a distance at Brandon Boudreaux at close range, and then at close range killed 𝗟𝗪𝗪𝗂. And then he also points out that Chad is not implicated in those incidents. So we've gone from him trying to make the case that it was an unrelated prank by a mentally disturbed youth in the area to now 𝗟𝗪𝘀𝗃 acted on Lori Vallow's orders, and this was all Lori, had nothing to do with Chad. So he's just trying to cover all bases here. Because remember, on the defense, they only have to have one reasonable doubt, and Chad walks. So the burden is on the state here. And then there's a short sidebar because the state objects to Pryor saying, and then they come back and they continue talking about all of the searches for preparing an AR for cold weather. And Pryor saying, well, Alex could have been talking about hunting. And basically, yeah, they said, yeah, he could have been hunting, but, the detective also says that Chad drove the Dakota, not Tammy, and so why would he be Googling the vehicle that Chad was in? And it could have been easily that Chad told him what Tammy would be driving that night. And then they talk about how all the information was obtained from Tammy's phone, and more about the existence of light and dark spirits, and says that light and dark, Pryor says that light and dark are the standard for more religions. And Pryor is really not questioning at this point. He's ranting. He's just ranting, and the detective is just sitting there. Interesting. And then he talked about how Chad had at one point cleared a dark spirit from one of his own 5 children at a 4.2 dark spirit, and no one killed that child. Of course they didn't. They were Chad's children. So basically, Boyce just calls lunch at this point. I think the judge was just sick of hearing it, and so they just call lunch. And then after lunch, the detective is still on the stand, and Pryor continues. Pryor asks the detective why the Daybell state president, a Latter-day Saint leader, requested Chad's publisher stop publishing Chad's books. The detective says, I have no idea. And he's asking the detective about Chad's exercise habits. Why would Chad was preparing for a 5K and all this stuff. And then he moves over to why how Tammy tripped over a duck gate, and that was proof that she was clumsy and on the decline. Again, he's just talking. He's talking at the witness. He's not asking any questions. So finally, he again talks about how the children were found in the yard, at the pond and in the burn pit and pet cemetery. And then talks about the infamous text from Chad to Tammy about the raccoon that was, shot and buried on the day that they believe that 𝗟𝗪𝘀𝗃 buried the children. And then they show pictures of large raccoons in the yard, one that Chad had shot, and said that he could have been telling the truth there. And then they talk about some text messages between Tammy and Chad where she told Chad she wasn't feeling well about 3 weeks before her death. And that he prior asked the detective if he is aware Tammy didn't drive because of medical concerns. He says he did not know that. There was no proof of that. And she was driving the night she was shot at. She also drove herself to work. So um, that all the medicines found in the house the day of the shoot, the day that Tammy died, were over-the-counter medications, except for her antidepressants. And I understand why she was on antidepressants. So basically, Pryor finally tenders the witness. Lindsay Blake does some redirect, and she just jumps in on the light and dark scale and talked about how anybody that was, rated dark was eventually killed, especially if they were considered an obstacle by Chad Daybell and his lot. And the detective agrees that it looks that way. And again, hammers in that there was no apparent medical problems with Tammy Daybell. And then she starts asking the detective about the Daybell's driveway, says that it was the driveway that Tammy used the night of the attempted shooter, but the house had a second longer driveway. They agree. They show pictures of it. And he asks about the lighting. She asks about the lighting around 9 p.m. in Fremont County and says it's dark dusk because of the mountain setting and where they're located. It doesn't get dark the same way it would in the central or eastern part of the United States. It's more of a dark dusk, but it's still dark enough that a gun could easily be mistaken for a paintball gun. And then he says it's not unusual that she was Googling paintball guns because she really thought that's what happened to her. And then she never showed officers a picture of a paintball gun saying this was the gun. She only said this looks like the gun. And then they show a photo of Alex's rifle and again go over all of the parts that could easily be mistaken for a paintball gun. In fact, they show an actual paintball gun and Alex's rifle with the scope, and they look remarkably similar. That combined with dusky dark could easily be mistaken. And so basically they continue talking about that, and he says, and then she hones in on the whoosh that Tammy thought was the paintball gun misfiring, and he says that a misfire or a jam on a real rifle can make a variety of sounds, and a whoosh would not be atypical. So definitely. And then they talk about the Tammy's Facebook page, how she was simply warning people in the neighborhood that it happened to her. So she wasn't accusing anybody. She only brought up the name of the mentally disturbed teenager as the only person in the neighborhood she thought might be capable of that. As you would if someone puts a gun on you and you've got a neighbor that has, given his family problems in the past, you might consider, okay, that might be the person because you're just trying to find out who did that to you. No disrespect to anybody out there with BPD. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's a normal reaction. And then they determine, they talk more about the Dodge Dakota and how that was very specific. And just because it was Chad's vehicle does not mean that Tammy was never driving it. And then Blake rests. Boyce wants to again redirect, and Pryor wants to redirect. Judge Boyce warns him this will be a limited redirect because now he's over all the ranting. He really is. And Pryor asked the detective, wouldn't somebody if somebody was trying to hurt somebody, be at closer range, wouldn't they use a pistol or a shotgun, not a rifle? And the detective says you can use any gun at close range. It's just the difference is only in the amount of damage it does. And then he talks about how, that lots of people in Idaho go to gun ranges. He said, absolutely. That doesn't prove anybody's guilt or innocence. It's everything else on top of it. And he's finally released. And then the next state witness is called is Spencer Cook. He is the Sugar City Salem School District Technology Director. So he would have been somebody that Tammy Daybell would have worked with. And he says he's in charge of anything that plugs into the wall for the school district and also manages all of the email accounts. He said he recalls receiving a request from police to retrieve an email from 𝗟𝗲𝗃𝗀𝗃 to Tammy Daybell. 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗃, who was doing the questioning, asked Cook to read a portion of the email. Charles says he has vital and disturbing information regarding Chad and Lori. Remember, Charles tried to warn Tammy on multiple occasions that his wife and her husband were having an affair. Cook says the email was read and deleted, and that then Tammy blocked his email address. So Tammy didn't want to believe. Bless her heart, she did not want to believe that her husband of 30 years was capable of cheating on her. Or maybe she was scared of him. We don't know. But the state tenders the witness. Pryor has nothing to ask. And so the Spencer Cook is released from all subpoenas. And at this point, testimony is done for the day. I will be back very, very soon, probably Monday, with the testimony that occurs today, Friday, April 26th. I am told by reading that next week will be a short week. There's probably not going to be any court on at least one day, but I will be back with all of the information as soon as it falls, and I hope you're enjoying this. And until next time, keto and crime.